Welcome to the Hidden Why podcast. This is episode 992, my interview with Fleet Maull. We're discussing his new book, Radical Responsibility. You're going to love it. G'day, Fleet. Welcome to the Hidden Why podcast. Great to have you here.
Hey, Lee. Great to be here.
You're doing loads of stuff, eh? Keeping busy.
Yeah, keep busy. Keeps me out of trouble.
I got your book here, Radical Responsibility, and I just love that idea of taking ownership for our lives. So just keen as to delve into this, but I actually was curious about your backstory too, Fleet. You were imprisoned for 14 years, was it?
I was, yeah, and that's obviously, I'm certainly not proud of what got me there. I was, one of the baby boomers that came of age in the counterculture era in the U.S., and I just went headlong into all that stuff. I was kind of a classic angry young man and just had a big hole in my gut from various childhood stuff. And anyway, I went headlong into that, but I was always a spiritual seeker and interested in the mind and majored in psychology and things like that. So, I had kind of a split life. I had a lot of good stuff going on in my life, but I was also involved in kind of living outside the system. I lived as an expat in South America for quite a few years and fell in the small-time drug smugglings, unfortunately, to kind of finance living outside the system. And before I could untangle myself from that, I earned my way into quite a long federal sentence. But I do feel good about what I did with the time that I spent there. And I think I was able to do a lot of good. And that's really where the radical responsibility approach was born during my experience in prison.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, wow. So 14 years, I mean, I couldn't imagine what that would be like at all, but I assume it's a very big awakening for a lot of people that experience that. And obviously you've used the time well to go through a radical transformation.
Well, when I first got sentenced, I was actually sentenced to 30 years with no parole.
Wow.
And I was actually facing potentially life in parole on my day of sentencing, anywhere from 10 years to life. Uh-huh. And if I had gotten life, I'd still be there. Because the only thing that would get you out of that would be a presidential pardon, which is highly unlikely, unless you're extremely well connected. So, but fortunately, I was sentenced under what they call the old law in the U.S. under the federal sentencing guidelines. I was before the guidelines. So back then, before 1987, you still received a lot of good time. So on a 30-year no parole sentence, if I stayed out of trouble while I was in prison, I would have served about 18 and a half. And then after my appeal went through the courts, they knocked off one count of the 5 counts, and that reduced my aggregate sentence to 25 years. And so on that, I would serve 14 and a half if I stayed out of trouble, which is what I ended up serving, 14 inside and 6 months in a halfway house and on house release. But it took me a while to figure that out, how all that worked. And actually, when I got sentenced, and even for the first, I was in county jail for 7 months going through trial and sentencing, which was quite a hellhole. And then when I got to the federal prison, it was actually a relief because it was a big place and, I could get a job and there was a prison yard and things to do. But it was also a world of tremendous suffering. It was a maximum security federal prison hospital with 600 medical patients and 400 psychiatric patients. And it was really, when I first got there, it was kind of like a Fellini movie. It was just so much suffering. And at any rate, I was there for maybe 6 months before I even figured out that good time thing. So initially, I was 35 when I got sentenced, so I pretty much thought my life was over. I mean, the paper the next morning said I would be 65 before I have any chance of release. So anyway, it took me a while to figure that out, and even once I did, it was still like a long time.
Yeah, wow. So you had a PhD in psychology before you went in?
I had a master's in psychology.
Master's?
I did a 3-year clinical training program, and then I worked on my PhD while I was in prison and finally finished a dissertation just a few years ago.
Oh, okay, that's interesting. So going in there, I mean, how did that affect your mindset? And I guess that probably had a big part to play in the work you do now, huh? You do a lot of meditation and mindfulness training and things like that?
Yeah, I also do a lot of work in the criminal justice field and the public safety field. So, I had been involved in a deep path of meditation and a lot of study and practice for really about 15 years before I went to prison. And I'd been trained actually as a meditation teacher, but I had this secret life that I kept separate, and I knew that the two worlds I was in didn't make sense. And, I spent about half the year in meditation retreats and studying with my teacher, traveling with my teacher, and doing various kinds of good work. And then I spent another half of the year, being this kind of crazy smuggler cowboy character. And,
Yeah.
I just kind of self-medicated around the cognitive dissonance there. I knew it had to end, but before I could untangle myself from it, I managed to earn my way into that federal prison sentence. But when I got there, well, it was really just the fact of even getting arrested and then going to trial. I mean, I hit a wall immediately and realized, my son was 9 years old and now he's going to grow up without his dad. And I had the I mean, I did love my son and I do love my son, but I was making so many selfish decisions that, it's amazing that I was putting his life at risk, his mother, my family's lives at risk, continually.
Yeah.
And so I just hit that wall, and I became radically dedicated to, first in terms of my son, just to hopefully do something to leave him a better legacy than just his dad died in prison. Maybe I had no surety that I'd survive my prison time.
Yeah.
And I also became just radically dedicated to get all the negativity out of my life and really try to do something good with everything I'd received from my family and my spiritual teachers. And so, I also realized that I had to not only really focus on my meditation practice even more intensely than I had been before, but I had to really embrace the ethical foundation of the Buddhist tradition I was part of, which I'd been kind of ignoring, obviously. And so I really refocused my life and led this life for 14 years of a prison monk, very dedicated to serving the community I was in and living an ethical life and practicing hours of meditation every day and other kinds of contemplative practices. So it was really a kind of a crucible of transformation for me those 14 years in a very intense environment.
I can imagine.
It's a very dangerous environment. It's in your face all day long. I mean, on a good day, maybe you only have 6 or 7 very demeaning experiences interacting with either your fellow prisoners or with the correctional officers, So, I mean, it's a hellish environment. And so, and I always really want to let people know that most people come out of prison worse than they went in. It's a very damaging, toxic environment. It's even toxic for the people that work there. I was lucky that I came in with a lot of resources and then with a lot of motivation. I was able to use it as a transformational journey for myself. But that's not the case for most people that end up incarcerated.
No, so you really have to, I don't know, is it that sort of character that you're just inherited that helps you get through those, or, just your previous conditioning? Because I imagine there's a lot of anger, a lot of sadness, a lot of suffering, and being in that environment, it's got to be very contagious, I assume.
Yeah, absolutely. And, maybe it had something to do with kind of whatever character from my upbringing or even genetics, but mostly I think it was really, it was the influence of all the training and everything I received from my principal spiritual teacher, the Tibetan master Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, and from my parents, and the good stuff I'd received, and fortunately when I got to that federal prison, after spending 7 months in this really horrible little county jail place, that was really a hell realm. And of course I was completely absorbed with the drama of my own situation, right? I'd just gotten sentenced to 30 years without parole. I thought my life was over. And then I get to this federal prison, and I remember the first few days walking around, and it was literally like some kind of Fellini movie. I mean, men were being, assisted walking around blind, people being wheeled around in wheelchairs who were paraplegics and quadriplegics in prison, men coming out of the psych ward doing the Helidol or Thorazine two-step over-medicated. I mean, it was really, and the amount of suffering, and it literally just served to shock me out of my preoccupation with myself. And I just immediately woke up to the amount of suffering that was there. And because of the influences from my teacher and my background, I just realized I got to show up here and serve. I'm here. I don't know why I'm here. I know why I'm here. I earned my way there pretty stupidly, but nonetheless, I'm here for a reason, and I got to figure out how to show up and serve. So that really jolted me out of preoccupation with my own drama and got me focused on how I could serve there. The other thing that you kind of mentioned was it was an environment of tremendous anger and bitterness. When you'd meet another prisoner, kind of the ritual was you might on a lunch break after lunch or somewhere, you go out for a walk in the yard, right? You walk in the track. They had a big track out in the main yard around a softball field and some other stuff out there. So, you'd be walking and talking, and, they'd share their victim story, and you'd share your victim story. My fault partner screwed me over, and my lawyer screwed me over, and this, and, everybody's got a big victim story, right? And after I did that once or twice, it was like I certainly didn't want to hear my own story anymore, and I didn't really want to hear their stories, which isn't very compassionate. But I just realized if I don't proactively do otherwise, I'm going to come out of here broken, bitter, angry, with a big victim mindset. And I didn't even want to live that way while I was in prison. And I'm really grateful for the training I'd had previously, the education I had previously. That's not who I wanted to be even while I was in prison. But I realized I was going to have to really proactively work to be otherwise. So, I realized that the only way I was going to get through this experience, if I survived, and the only way I would create any kind of life for myself beyond prison, if I ever got out, was to really embrace absolute 100%, if not 200% responsibility for having got myself into that situation and what I was going to do with it, the choices I was making. So that's where really the radical responsibility approach was born for me.
So this radical responsibility, it's about taking responsibility, obviously, for your life and your choices and et cetera, et cetera. Is that sort of encapsulated? You could probably word it better than I just did.
Yeah, and that just seems like it makes common sense, but I take it very deep.
Take me there.
Basically, I often describe it as voluntarily embracing 100% responsibility or ownership for each and every circumstance we face in life, which includes the ones we can see we had something to do with, maybe we created or allowed or enabled or, whatever. We can see we had some connection to it. But it also includes the ones that we don't see we have any connection to. They just literally seem like they fell out of the sky, and everybody would agree that it was a great injustice, or we were, a victim of that, or whatever. We even own those because that's the only place we have any real agency or power. So the critical thing about the radical responsibility approach to life is making a distinction between ownership and blame, because we've all been enculturated, I feel, into a culture really predominated by shame and blame that has an underlying negative view of humanity, that if you don't, absent the coercive threat of some kind of shaming or blaming, human beings won't behave well. It kind of comes out of the very Calvinist negative view of humanity and like the flawed nature of humanity. But it's in the human condition too.
Why do you think that's in the human condition, this shaming and blaming?
Well, because we're biologically set up for survival. And, job one is survival for any species. And so we know there's something called a negativity bias, that our brain pays a lot more attention to threat and negativity than anything else. In fact, absent any kind of uncomfortable or unfamiliar or threatening things, when we're in neutral or we're having positive experiences, our memory faculty in the midbrain dampens way down. We don't remember things with anywhere near the detail, vividness, or clarity. And most importantly, it doesn't even go into long-term memory unless we hold it in short-term memory intentionally. The science says for about 12 to 20 seconds. Whereas negative experiences, they go right into long-term memory with great vividness and detail. So what's our long-term memory mostly full of? Negativity. And that develops what's called implicit memory and implicit bias, where we spin those things we're experiencing to the negative, right? And so, that's where the human condition ends up with this kind of negative view of life.
And I guess that just evolves as you grow.
Default setup.
Yeah, wow. And that just evolves as you obviously grow and you get further conditioned with that negativity bias.
Yeah, and then of course that's influenced the world's religions as well. So I personally think that the kind of Calvinist form of Protestant Christianity that really focuses on this negative view of humanity, the flawed nature of humanity, and it really influenced the U.S. and its early culture.
That's interesting. Yeah.
I think it's just the influence of the negativity bias on a world religion that in its roots was quite wonderful. But at any rate, so we have that. That's what we're up against, and so for a lot of us, we're kind of enculturated to believe if something goes down, if something happens, somebody's got to be blamed. And so if I can't blame somebody else, I'm going to have to blame myself. And I don't want to blame myself. I've had enough blame and shame, thank you very much. So we naturally deflect. We almost automatically, instinctively deflect blame away from ourselves, right? And so, that's natural. We don't need to feel bad about it. It's human condition. But the problem is in doing so, we give our power away. Because if I'm unhappy, like you and I have a conflict, let's say, right? We have a business deal went south, and we're all hot on the collar. We're ready to go to fisticuffs or lawyer up and go to court. And maybe we have a friend who said, "Oh, don't do that. You're going to blow your money on lawyers." I know this person who's a mediator, right? And so we go see the mediator, and they interview both of us, and then they come back and say, "Well, you're both incredible storytellers and salespeople, so it's a he said thing." But I'll tell you what, I'm going to put together a focus group who don't know you, couldn't care less about you, and they're smart people. We're going to show it to them. So we have a video of the situation or something.
Yeah.
So I show it to them. They come back, and the mediator says to either one of us, well, they agree that it's more the other person's fault. In fact, they think it's about 70-30 or 60-40, right? Well, and maybe I'm the one that is less at fault. So I go, wow, I feel vindicated. I'm so glad they realize it's mostly Lee's fault, and I feel vindicated. But does that really make sense? Because if by definition, I'm unhappy, I'm suffering, right? Because, this situation, if I'm convinced that it's caused by you, whatever percent, whether it's 60, 70, or even 30%, I don't get to feel differently until you change. Can I control you? No, I can't control you. We can't control the world around us. So when we ascribe causation for our internal states to people and things outside ourselves, which we all do all day long, we're giving our power away. And in fact, it's actually not the case, because our internal feelings and states arise out of our perception of our needs being met or not. Our basic human needs for, connection, love, belonging, relationship, autonomy, self-agency, respect, food, warmth, shelter, right? When I perceive my needs are being met, I have all the warm and fuzzy emotions. When I perceive my needs are threatened or not being met, then I have the difficult emotions. And that's a whole internal landscape that we have a lot of agency over. But we don't assume that agency. We assume my feelings are caused by people and things outside myself. And in assuming that, I give my power away to people all the time. So what radical responsibility really is, it has nothing to do with blaming ourselves. Obviously, it has nothing to do with blaming others, obviously. It has absolutely nothing to do with blaming ourselves, and it's certainly not about blaming victims. It's actually an act of radical self-empowerment. It's intensely putting my energy where it can do the most good, which is with myself and my own choices, my own behaviors. Now, that's not to say that I might experience something where other people have a contribution or the world has a contribution. There's injustice. There's all of that, right? And I can even decide I'm going to work to fight injustice, but doing so from an approach of radical responsibility, I feel is much more effective than doing so from a victim mindset.
Yeah. Wow, well explained. How do we start to reverse this conditioning of blame and shame? Because it's
it's everywhere.
We can all see it. It's everywhere.
Turn on the news. What do you hear all day long? When was the last time you heard a politician own something? They just, it's a big blame fest. It's just everywhere. It's pernicious.
Yeah. So how do we start to take radical responsibility?
Well, I believe we need some kind of awareness practice, because that's why the Radical Responsibility book is grounded in three things to begin with, which are the first three chapters. The first chapter is all about the view that there's nothing fundamentally wrong with us, which is the opposite of that kind of Calvinist, flawed nature of humanity view. And it's really been the dominant historical view throughout humanity cross-culturally is the innate basic goodness, the unconditional goodness of human beings and of life altogether. I mean, the idea that life is somehow a mistake and that we're all fundamentally broken, it doesn't even make sense in the first place. So in the depth of our being, there's nothing wrong with us. And that's the view of basic goodness. So it starts with that. And then we can actually experience that directly through various mindfulness and awareness practices, mindfulness and awareness meditation, various contemplative practices that allow us to drop into the body and into the depth of our being, where we actually experience that there is nothing wrong with us. So we're not missing anything. We're not broken. We may have all kinds of issues on the surface that we need to deal with, but in the depth of our being, nothing wrong. And that's really the deepest source of our unconditional confidence and resilience and so forth in life. And then the third chapter is about the integrating mindfulness, mind training with emotional intelligence training. So we really start to understand how our emotions work and work with our mind. By having some kind of reflective, contemplative, or mindfulness practice gives us the ability to recognize what's going on with ourselves and recognize, how thoughts lead to feelings, to impulses, to behaviors, to consequences, to impact on others. And then we have the possibility of waking up in the midst of all our conditioning and going, oh, I see what's going on here. I could actually make a different choice that would lead to a different result, and I'm going to choose that, right? So I think we need something to slow it down, some kind of mind training, some kind of contemplative practice. And then we need to really understand something about the human condition. We need to understand the psychology of conditioning. We need to understand how habits are formed, how you can deconstruct habits and create new habits, right? We need to understand the dynamics of drama, which is why I focus a lot on Cartman's drama triangle in the book, the whole triangulation of the victim mindset, the persecutor mindset, and the rescuer mindset, and how to get free of that, because it drives human conflict and drama, from the drama that destroys families and causes divorce to the drama that plays out in constant warfare all around the world. So, understanding all this, like, I love Tony Robbins often says he wants people to become, you don't have to go get a degree in psychology, but he wants us to become practical psychologists, which means we understand enough about the basic human psychology to be able to free ourselves from living an unconscious mechanical life and developing
makes
awareness
sense, doesn't
so
it?
we can actually, direct our own life.
Yeah. Well, it makes sense. I mean, you can't fix something if you don't really understand the mechanics behind it. So
exactly.
That makes a lot of sense. Just skipping back a little bit to that mindfulness practice or reflective practice, is there a particular practice that you'd recommend or that you could walk us through, maybe what you do as far as a mindfulness practice?
Yeah, well, I do a lot of practices, but the basic practice, the foundation practice, is basic mindfulness of body, mindfulness of breath, practice or meditation.
Okay.
And, there's lots of ways you can integrate mindfulness into your life. You can, when you're out walking your dog, you can do it mindfully as opposed to just letting your mind spin out and drift around, right? So you can bring mindfulness into any activity, but you're going to more likely to remember to do that if you have a foundational practice where you take a few minutes of your day, whether 10 minutes or, I do an hour every morning at least, but the more you do, the better. But even 10 minutes can be effective, where you just sit down, you sit in a relatively upright posture that's wakeful, and maybe you lower your gaze so you're not distracted. And then you just bring your attention to the body, to actually feeling the physicality of the body from head to toe, and feeling the breath flowing out of your body, in and out. And so in that way, I know when I'm breathing in, I know when I'm breathing out, I'm present, I'm awake. And, so I'm using the physical awareness, the sensory awareness of the body and the sensory awareness of the breath as an anchor to anchor me in the present moment. And then, of course, I'm going to get distracted. My mind's going to wander off. That's what it does. And when I notice my mind has wandered, I bring it back. If it wanders again, I bring it back. I don't beat myself up about it. That's not helpful at all. I just gently bring it back. And every time I recognize that my mind has wandered and I bring it back, it's like doing another rep. I'm building that muscle of mindfulness, right? So that's basic mind training, right? We decide to place our attention somewhere, and when our attention moves, we bring it back. Basic, you can do that with anything, but that's the core training. And then as you're doing that, you want to infuse the awareness you're bringing to your own experience, right? Because once you stabilize your attention a bit through training, then you're just being with your experience as it is, which includes all your sensory experience, the 5 senses. It includes your emotional experience. It includes all the thoughts coming and going. Yeah. And you're able to just be with that and kind of let it. There's 2 things. One, you're just letting it be as it is, and you're creating an attitudinal approach along with that of, attitude of openness, curiosity, non-judgment, inclusiveness, self-acceptance. So you create this non-judgmental space, and you just allow your experience to arise as it will and fall away as it will within that. And there's a natural kind of emptying and healing that happens of all the accumulated junk in our nervous system. And at the same time, by just being there and witnessing your own experience moment to moment, over time you develop a lot of insight into how it all works. And that insight is what frees us from the mechanicalness, the conditioned mechanicalness of living a mechanical, unconscious, reactive life. And we learn to live an awake, present life where we're actually here, awake, present, available in our relation. It completely transforms our relationship because instead of sleepwalking through life and being in a reactive relationship with others, we're actually available. Where people experience us as really awake, present, available, and it's very different.
Have more intention, I guess.
And there's so much available now. I mean, there's so many apps, and I mean, on the web, there's just so many resources for mindfulness training. Now, I have them on my own website, fleetmaull.com or heartmindinstitute.co. But, there's so much out there now. It's become a big world, the world of mainstream mindfulness.
It's huge, isn't it? It's gone gangbusters, as I say. Yeah,
I mean, here in the U.S., there's a new app that they've poured. I mean, there must be a lot of money in it because there's a new app called Calm. And LeBron James is the one promoting it. He's getting paid big bucks for doing that.
Who's that, James? Who did you say is promoting it?
Yeah, he's like the celebrity promoter for that app, right? And
who was that?
James. It's called Calm, Calm, Calm.
Calm up. Google that, guys.
But there's hundreds of apps. I mean, there's probably 1,000 mindfulness apps now.
Do you have a app at all, or just the website there?
We have an app for our. We do a lot of work in the criminal justice and public safety space. That's been a big part of my work ever since. Well, even while I was in prison, I started a nonprofit while I was in there to support other prisoners interested in mindfulness and Buddhist meditation and things like that. And so I've been out for 22 years now, and that's a thriving nonprofit now. Not only do we work with at-risk, incarcerated, and returning youth and adults, but now we do a lot of work with correctional officers, probation and parole officers, police, fire and safety. So we've been doing that with public safety professionals for about 12, 13 years. And for that work, we have an app that's called CMPS, which is Center for Mindfulness and Public Safety, CMPS Mindfulness. So if somebody goes to an app store and you just put in CMPS Mindfulness, they can find our app,
So when did you said you were quite into this spirituality before you went into prison. I think you mentioned Buddhism. Is that where you sort of started your mindfulness practices way back then?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know why I was spiritually inclined. I grew up Roman Catholic in the Midwest of the U.S. And, my family early on used to think I was going to become a priest, but I lost my faith pretty early on, actually. I had a good Catholic education. I had grade school K through 12 with Dominican nuns, and then that was pretty intense.
Why do you think you lost your faith there?
I just don't think I ever had it. I think I was probably, okay. There is such a thing as multiple lifetimes. I think I was probably been a Buddhist for a long time. But I went to high school, a Jesuit high school, where they're good educators. I got a very good, kind of Jesuit prep school education.
Yeah.
And they actually were happy for you to graduate a thinking agnostic rather than just retaining your kind of childhood catechismal beliefs. But at any rate, in my sophomore year, in a comparative religion class, was the first time I read texts from other religions. And I read some Buddhist texts, some Buddhist scripture, classical Buddhist scriptures. And it was the first thing I ever read that really made any sense to me. It was just really, I just read it, and it was just immediate recognition. And then that summer, I ran into a book by Herigel, a German who had gone to Japan, in the late 40s or 50s and studied the Japanese Zen art of archery called Kyudo.
Yeah.
And his work with his Kyudo master was basically a deconstruction of his own ego, his own conditioning. And I read that book, and I immediately knew I was a Buddhist. And I started reading D.T. Suzuki, and there wasn't a whole lot published back then. But I started reading various things, and I was growing up in the middle of the United States, so there weren't a lot of other people interested in that. But I kept stumbling along, finding my way, and then eventually I was living in South America as an expat and studying the few books that were available on Tibetan Buddhism and Taoism, and I was trying to meditate on my own. And but I knew I needed more help, and then I heard about the founding of Naropa University in 1974 by the Tibetan master Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche. I knew I had to go there, so that's where I went and got my master's degree. And it was a 3-year, a really deep clinical training program in psychology and counseling. And I did that for 3 years, and in the process became a student of his, and that's where I really got deep into Buddhist training and practice.
Yeah, wow. So what was that book by that German guy again?
It's called Zen in the Art of Archery, or Zen and the Art of Archery. I can't remember.
Zen and the Art of Archery. Yeah.
Either Zen in or Zen and. I think it's Zen in the Art of Archery.
Be worth a read. I'll put it on the list. So this mindfulness practice, we've talked about it many times on the show here, and yes, there's a lot of information and apps and all that sort of stuff out there for people to delve into it, but certainly a great place to start with this, idea of awareness, becoming more aware and becoming more intentional. And I won't claim to be a great example of, how to have a mindfulness practice, but certainly I do practice it, and it's helped me in a great way. And I need to do more of it, having conversations with the likes of yourself, Fleet. It's certainly something that inspires me to get into it a bit more. What is empathic awareness? You talk about that in chapter 3. Yeah.
Well, I work a lot with Goleman's model, Daniel Goleman, who's a colleague. His model of emotional intelligence training. So he has the 4 quadrants of self-awareness, and then self-regulation, social awareness, and then relationship management or effective relationship skills.
Yeah.
So in the realm of social awareness, we talk about empathic awareness, which means, first of all, it really requires first developing an empathic relationship with ourselves. So as we're practicing various contemplative practices, mindfulness practices, that's creating that internal attitude towards oneself. Shifting to we're often very self-critical. We're all very hard on ourselves, which isn't helpful. So it's great to be honest with ourselves, but it's not helpful to beat ourselves up. So we're shifting our relationship to ourselves to be one that's a lot more self-accepting, a lot friendlier to ourselves. And I mean, if we're not going to be our own best friend, who will be, right?
Yeah.
And so, we're developing these attitudinal qualities of self-acceptance and self-compassion and so forth, self-empathy. So as we develop a more self-aware way of being, and as we're developing greater empathy for ourselves, then when we turn our attention to the world around us, that attention is naturally more empathic. And so empathic awareness means I'm tuning into the world around me, both the physical world, the natural world, and the people that I interact with, and with greater interest and curiosity, I'm seeing more. I'm basically getting more data, right? The more aware I am, I'm getting more data and more accurate data about myself and the world around me. And then especially in terms of the people I interact with in my life, I'm really tuning into what are they feeling and needing. And I actually care about what they're feeling and needing. And because I tune in and I'm more aware of body language and facial expression, and because I just care, I'm naturally picking up more data and understanding what's going on with the people I interact with. I don't know for sure, but I'm getting a better sense of it, of what's going on with them, what they're feeling and what they might be needing. And that's just going to give me the data to be able to interact with them much more skillfully so that we can find win-win ways to get our needs met in mutually beneficial ways, right? So really just tuning into others with a caring attitude. And that's really what we mean by empathic awareness.
I guess you take it away from that level of self-absorption that, again, guilty as for walking out there every day, focusing on your own needs and those being met and really just disregarding others, not in a deliberate way, but certainly in an unconscious or subconscious sort of manner. Yeah. And you sort of said that when you went into prison, you sort of walked in there and you were so self-absorbed because everything's just happened to you, but then you started to remove yourself from within and focusing on everything around you, as an example.
Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely an example of that. And we don't need to feel bad about any of it. Again, it's just a human condition.
Yeah.
And I think the science is really helpful. That's one thing. I think that's one of the reasons that the mainstream mindfulness movement, which is based mostly on practices that came out of the Buddhist tradition, although you can find similar practices in all the great religious traditions and philosophical traditions and indigenous and shamanic traditions. But the core practices that are most used in the mainstream mindfulness movement kind of literally came from basic Buddhist meditation.
Yeah.
But at any rate, it's like we don't need to feel bad about what's going on. And the thing that really helps with that, and I think this caused the mainstream mindfulness movement to expand so quickly, is that we have so much scientific understanding of it today. The marriage between, the several thousand-year-old tradition of meditation and current neuroscience has really exploded the interest and the availability of it. So one simple thing that's very helpful to understand is we have many neural networks in the brain, but two that really come into play here. One's called the default mode network. And the default mode network is active when we do not direct our attention. If we just, don't direct our attention and the mind's just wandering wherever it minds, that's the noisy part of our brain. And it loves to time travel. It loves to go into the past and ruminate about the past, worry about the past. It loves to go into the future and fantasize about the future, worry about the future. It's got a running commentary going on about the present, thinking about me and what others think about me, informing all my opinions. We're all familiar with that noisy, like static of a radio station going on between our ears all the time.
Yeah.
And when people try to practice mindfulness or meditation, they go, "Oh, I can't. My mind's too busy. My eyes can't focus." Well, that's what's going on.
That's
right?
what's happening.
So there's another set of neural networks called the task positive network, sometimes called the executive network. And that activates when we direct our attention.
Right.
And so that's why the way I teach mindfulness, I teach a very embodied approach to mindfulness. I get people to really feel their body at a sensate level, not only sensations on the surface of the skin from head to toe, but all the internal sensations, activating our capacity for interoception, which is short for internal perception, or interoceptive awareness, where we can feel the body all the way down to the bones, because the entire body is a living organism, all containing neuronal cells, all connected to the central nervous system, including the bones, the marrow of the bones, the circulatory system, the muscles, connective tissue, vital, the whole body. And with practice, we can really feel into that and develop a relationship with the living sensory experience of the body. And the more we do that, that really anchors us in the body, and it activates the task positive network. And the task positive network and the very noisy default mode network are mutually inhibitory. So as you bring the task positive network online, the default mode network goes offline, and you find your attention stabilizing, and then your awareness stabilizing, and that starts to give us access to profound states of awareness. So the fact that that we're living kind of mechanical, unconscious mind, with constantly distracted, we don't need to feel bad about that. That's just where we all start. That's the human condition.
Yeah. Again, well explained. The whole body-mind connection, and I just going on to a point you just sort of mentioned there, I imagine that's why, getting outdoors and going for a run or doing some exercise, being physical, can actually help you connect a bit more with this intention as well. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there's the inner work and the outer work, right? So I personally feel it's really important to develop that internal awareness of the body. And the deeper that goes, we're going into that body-mind continuum, right? Body and mind are not separate. There's some kind of continuum. And the deeper we go into that, feel into that, we're starting to get into below the noise and into the depth of our being. And that's where we're going to experience unmistakably that innate, unconditional basic goodness, where we know we're not broken. We know we don't need fixing. We know we're whole. And that gives us tremendous unconditional confidence about our life. And at the same time, by getting out of our head and getting out in the external world and focusing on nature especially. Now, we're all kind of internally focused, although we're really distracted by the internal noise in our head. We're constantly distracted by the world around us, but not in a very conscious way. But if we get out in nature especially and really pay attention to our sense perceptions, right, and appreciate the colors and the natural world and really go out for a hike. And usually when you go out for a hike, your mind quiets because you're really, the beauty of the world around you. I remember one time I went into Muir Woods, which is, in Northern California, I think in Marin County, just over the Golden Gate Bridge to the north of it. And it's all these old redwoods, right? And it's a very famous place. And there's these huge old growth redwoods in there. And when you go in there, it's like going into a cathedral and everybody just talks at a whisper. You just naturally quiet down, your mind quiets down because you're just blown away by what you're experiencing, right? So the natural world can be very helpful way. So I think it's both in terms of awakening our sense perception, both internally and externally, has a lot to do with the path of awakening.
Can there be too much mindfulness?
Well, only if by mindfulness you meant kind of paranoid,
Well, yeah, I wonder if you can get too deep that you actually
right? If you become constantly self-monitoring, that's not really mindfulness. That's not what we mean.
That's different, isn't it? Yeah. No. So interesting about that. Yeah, the whole the focusing and going deep into that. What did you call it? The task mode network.
The task positive network is one name for it. Right?
Positive network. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. Which stabilizes our attention and our awareness.
Yeah. How do you get? I guess it's through this mindset training that you probably do, but this victim mentality that people have, and this, I guess it's going back to what we started with, the blame mentality as well. I guess it's all related. You talked about the empowerment triangle of radical responsibility.
Yeah, well, in the radical responsibility model, we begin with, we focus on understanding what I call the drama zone, and how we get into trying. We're enculturated and conditioned to try to get our needs met by blaming others, by justifying our own behaviors, by shaming ourselves, by being hooked on being right at the expense of being in a relationship, by holding on to resentments. All these things, we get an emotional payoff for doing these things, but we wouldn't do them if we didn't. But I call this the junk food of the emotional life, right? It's a quick payoff, lasting suffering. Yeah. And also it's where the drama triangle is. Stephen Cartman's drama triangle, where we get triggered into this triangulation, right? And I'm feeling victimized. I'm imagining someone or something is my persecutor. I start looking for a rescuer, and you get that triangle spinning, right? It becomes a toxic hole of constant conflict and drama. And once you study a bit of Cartman's drama triangle, you just see it everywhere. It just dominates our world. So then how do we get out of this, right? How do we get out of this world of the drama zone? Well, there's a magical question that I can always ask myself, whatever situation I'm in, and this really is what informed and transformed my life in prison.
Yeah.
So no matter how bad of a situation we might be in, right? Maybe our boss is a total tyrant. Maybe we're in prison. Maybe, whatever we're in. And maybe it's a complete injustice we're suffering, and it's terrible and it's horrible. So I ask myself one simple question, because I'm in that, I'm likely feeling victimized and feeling helpless and powerless, right?
Yeah.
So I can ask myself one simple question, and that question is, what can I do? The minute I ask myself that question, I'm shifting out of the victim mindset into what I call the co-creative mindset. I'm focused on solutions. There's always a million things we can do. Just attitudinally, there's different ways we can think about something. There's different ways we can frame something. If it's with an interaction with a coworker or a boss or something, or a spouse or whoever it is, there's hundreds of different ways we could approach that person. There's hundreds of different ways we could talk to that, and they'll all get a different result, right? So that gets us out of that victim mindset into the solution-based creative thinking, or what I call the co-creative mindset. And that gets me out of the drama zone and into the empowerment zone. Now, further, I talk about the steps to really kind of make that shift continuously or significantly, is that really it begins with what I call radical responsibility, which is embracing 100% ownership for each and every circumstance I face in life as an act of radical self-empowerment, having nothing to do with self-blame. Just like the example I gave before, when you're in conflict with someone, and if you ascribe causation to them, you're giving your power away because you can't control them. So in my own enlightened self-interest, I'm going to focus on what can I do, on self-responsibility, ownership for my own choices, which doesn't mean I'm dismissing. I may actually have been victimized by something, and people do get victimized. Yeah. But I'm just focused, okay, am I going to let this take me down? Or am I going to find the most creative way I can to respond? And that, in some circumstances, could take tremendous courage. And this isn't not about talking to somebody else who's been victimized and say, hey, you need to get off your victim trip. Absolutely not. That would be horrible. This is about ourselves, right? This is about what we're doing with our own experience. So first step is embracing that level of personal responsibility, radical responsibility, or ownership. The second step I call accountability, which means we keep our agreements. I do what I say I'm going to do. And then the third step is being open and real and genuine. So let's say you and I, Lee, we have a personal and professional relationship. Yeah. And I own my own stuff. I don't blame you for my stuff. I own my own stuff. I keep my agreements with you, and I'm willing to be open and real with you. What does that create between us?
A level of trust.
Exactly. And trust creates relationship. So we call the empowerment zone the domain of authentic relationship. Authentic, and to me, that's the blue sky of human life. We're social beings, and if we want an amazing life, we need amazing relationships. We don't do it alone. Now, we can have relationships down in the drama zone. We can find drama triangle buddies to get involved in drama with, but that's a whole other thing. What I'm talking about in terms of authentic relationships is the kind of relationships that we create in just the way I talked about, that, we own our own stuff, we take responsibility for our own stuff, we have integrity, we do what we say we're going to do, we do our best at that, and, if we make a mistake or we can't keep an agreement, then we renegotiate it. We own it and renegotiate it. And we're open and real with others, and that creates trust and creates real relationship, and that's really the blue sky of our human lives. And so we call that domain the domain of the authentic relationship, or the empowerment zone.
That's great. Well, I just love that one question, and I guess it comes from that, mindfulness practice. The more aware you are, the easier it is to be asking that question in those situations where you feel like the world's come down on you. What can I do? I think it's just fantastic. Mate, lots in this book. It's a fairly well-written book and lots of information in there to digest, so we'll stick the link in the show notes for the audience. I've got a couple of quick questions for you there, Fleet, and the first one is, other than your mindfulness practice, I suppose, is there any other ritual or routine that you have as part of your daily practice that helps contribute to your success in life?
Well, along with the basic mind training of mindfulness practices, I think it's very important to do self-compassion practices, and I have those in the book as well.
Okay. Yep.
So there's these self-empathy, self-compassion meditation practices I think are very important because we really need to work at shifting that inner landscape, that relationship we have with ourselves from being one where we're continually hard on ourselves and even shaming ourselves to one where we're fundamentally compassionate with ourselves. So that's really important. In terms of what I do, with I lead it. I work really hard, and I have an incredibly busy schedule, and I do a lot. People often wonder, well, how do you do all that? Well, I spend the first 2.5 hours every day on prepping for my day. So I wake up in the morning. I have a whole exercise routine I do in bed before I even get out of bed. All kinds of stretching and so forth, and then I do some intense breath work. And then when I sit on the side of my bed, then I do another kind of breath work. And then I get and do more work on the floor, push-ups and different stuff, some yoga stuff, yoga stretching. So I spend at least a half hour in that kind of exercise. Then I hit the shower and do my whole bathroom thing. Then I go into the room that my wife and I have for our meditation practice, and I do, and usually anywhere from an hour to an hour and 15 minutes usually of various inner practices, meditation practices. And then we go down and have breakfast. And I have a really good, healthy, nutritious breakfast. And so I do all that, and then I start my workday. So I've had 2.5 hours of really, taking care of myself, building that foundation for the day. And, and then I start my day. And during the day, I try to take a break every hour for 5 or 10 minutes and do some stretching, step outside for a minute. I usually stop and do a bit of a workout in the middle of the day. I have a workout thing down in my basement. And then, I have a nutritious dinner, and I usually go for a walk after dinner with my wife. And, I eat, I'm very careful what I eat. I'm mostly plant. So I'm not a vegetarian. I have been in my life, different points, but currently I'm not a vegetarian, but I mostly fish and mostly a plant-based diet, and, really focus on taking good care of myself so that I can really perform at the highest level. So
and that's certainly going to help with that self-compassion.
Yeah.
It's that's nice. It's so critical, that morning process too. I think it's it'll change anyone's well-being if they start getting into that sort of habit. Do you have a definition of success, or how do you define success?
I don't know. I think I certainly wouldn't want to measure success by any external standards or comparing it with anybody else. I think it really is about internal alignment with our own kind of our own spirit, our own being, and our own internal motivations. Like, I think if I'm not giving up on myself, if I'm not playing small, just to hide out, if I'm continually stepping up to challenge myself, stepping up to learn new things, and, taking some risks, reasonable risks, right? To learn and grow, to me, that's a successful life. If I'm still growing, I'm still learning. I like Tony Robbins has a definition of, what really brings about genuine happiness in life or genuine life satisfaction. He says it's the deeply felt experience that we're growing, that we're evolving, and the deeply felt experience that we're contributing to life. Yeah. So I think for any of us at whatever level makes sense for us, if we're still growing, still evolving, doing the work to grow and evolve, and if we're contributing to life at whatever level in some way, I think that's the definition of a successful life.
Yeah, I like that. What advice would you give your 20-year-old self?
Well, I would have I probably would have said don't get focus on training yourself and don't get lost in the reactivity and the seduction of the whole counterculture thing that I was facing at that time. But there's always what young people are, there's always the world of social media today. And, there's always something to get completely caught up and distracted by and seduced by. I would have said, life is about training. You're going to be in training the rest of your life. So just fall in love with training. Just fall in love with training. Whatever kind of training, whether it's working out physically, working out psychologically, growing, evolving, studying, just fall in love with training, become a lifelong learner, and just focus your energy there, and then trust that it's going to pay off really well for you and others.
Yeah, I like it. Do you think you would have been doing what you're doing today, such great work, if you didn't go through that process of going into prison?
I wouldn't be doing the same work, that's for sure. It's kind of by the time I got indicted and went to prison, I was already very motivated to turn my life around, and I was letting go of that stuff. Yeah. And if I had gone to prison, I'm sure I would have led a good life, but it would have been a very different life. And I don't know that I would have been adding as much value as adding to life today, and certainly not in the same way. But I still think I probably, there would have been elements, the kind of shadows of the stuff I've been involved with, right, would have lingered. I don't think I would have continued in criminal activity, but still, I don't think I would have embraced radical responsibility as soon as I did. Or I don't know if I would have ever stumbled into that level of radical responsibility. I would have continued my Buddhist path, and that's with, radical responsibility is not a new idea. I think I take it very deep and very radical. Even back to the Stoics, right? Marcus Aurelius, who sometimes they call him the last great Roman emperor, and he was a Stoic philosopher. There's a whole book of his aphorisms and sayings, which is highly recommended. But paraphrasing one of them, it's something like, the majority of people think that their destiny is controlled by their life circumstances, which is not true. The fact is their destiny is determined by their response to those circumstances, right? And then you have Viktor Frankl, who was, in the Nazi death camp at Auschwitz, where I go every year as one of the leaders of what we call a bearing witness retreat there. I've been going there for 20 years. It's a very transformative experience, and we take several hundred people there, or about 100 to 150 people there each year. And so Viktor Frankl was there. His whole family wiped out. He was in the labor camp where people were dropping like flies of starvation and extreme weather and abuse and everything you can imagine. But he was a psychiatrist and a psychologist, and he wanted to survive, but he was also really curious, why are some people dying? Why are some people surviving? And, he developed his whole post-war therapy model, logotherapy, from his experiences there. What he discovered two things. He discovered, one, that we're teleological human beings. We can only we need a sense of future to continue living. So he found that people that were surviving had something to live for. Whether it was some just wanted to survive so they could bear witness to what happened there, and for him, he wanted to survive to continue his work and finish his papers and his contributions to his field, and he kept visualizing that to give himself the will to go on. But the other thing he discovered was that even in the worst circumstances one can imagine, and you couldn't imagine much worse than being in one of the most infamous Nazi death camps of World War II, Auschwitz, right? Stripped of any ounce of human dignity, starving, and maybe a guard even has a gun right at your forehead, right? Like he said, even in that circumstance, you still have choice. Yeah. Maybe not a choice whether to live or die, because maybe the guard's going to pull the trigger, but you still have choice. And he said the choice you have is a choice over the attitude you bring to that situation. And that's a choice nobody can ever take away from you. Now, that can be a hard-won choice, because if you've been choosing anger and bitterness and a victim mindset your whole life, it's going to be hard to shift that in a moment, which is why it's good to practice with the small stuff. But people have made shifts even in those kind of circumstances. So, again, these are not new ideas. And he's also famous for talking about that space between the stimulus and the reaction, or the stimulus and the response. And therein lies the whole of human freedom, that ability to recognize our capacity to make a conscious choice. Yeah. Instead of just being driven by our habitual mechanical conditioning. So good.
So good. Love it. Love your work. If you were to be served your last meal, what would you request?
Well, if I let the I don't know if I'll call it evil, but if I let one side of my brain talk, it would probably be pizza. But if I let the more enlightened side of my brain talk, I'd probably love a really great salad out of my own backyard garden, which I'm enjoying quite frequently these days.
Yeah, nice. Is there a particular activity?
With a nice piece of salmon along with it.
Nice bit of. Is there a particular activity that gives you the greatest sense of joy?
Well, I love sailing. I'm a landlubber at the moment. I was living in Providence, Rhode Island a few years back, and I have my own sailboat. And my dog, I lost my beloved Labrador, ZG. He lived till he was 16, so good long life for a dog. But at any rate, the dock where I kept my boat was literally a block and a half from my house, and I could just, at the end of the day, 5 or 6 o'clock, I'd say, ZG, let's go to the boat. And he'd come racing out, and we'd just walk down to the boat and get on the boat, go sailing for 2 hours. So I really love that, and I miss that. I love sailing, so that's one activity that I really like. And now that I'm a landlubber, I don't have a lot of hobbies going on at the moment. I love my work. I'm passionate about my work. I'm sometimes accused of being a workaholic, but actually I'm just really passionate about what I do. But apart from that, I love hanging out with my wife and going out to dinner, or even just sitting around at home and having meals and talking together, because she's a fabulous, fabulous gourmet cook. And so, and also prime time being out with close friends. I enjoy that a lot.
That's excellent. Mate, real pleasure speaking with you. You've got a lot of links to, people to reach out to you, including obviously the book, radicalresponsibilitybook.com. You've got your own website, fleetmaull.com. Is there any other directions you want to send people?
Well, my courses, I have a lot of courses, including my online course on neurosomatic mindfulness, which I've worked really hard on. I think it's a very deep course. And the online summits we do, and some of my other courses like mindful leadership and so forth, is at a website called heartmindinstitute.co. Yeah. Not .com, but just .co. So heartmindinstitute.co is where I have all my online courses and the online summits we do.
Excellent. Guys, a lot of links there, all in the show notes, episode 992 with Fleet Maull. Just Google it. Fleet, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
My pleasure, Lee. Wish you all the best, and great to connect with, I don't know whether your audience is mostly in Australia, but I haven't been there yet. I really would love to get there, but I've always loved everything I've experienced about Australian culture and the Aussie friends that I've met. So if this is mostly an Aussie audience, I really want to say hello, mates, and great to be with you.
Well, make sure if you come, you visit the Sunshine Coast. We'll take you out for a bit of a beach swim or something.
That would be great.
Guys, check it out, thehiddenwhy.com, episode 992. Until next time, peace, passion, and purpose. See you soon. Thanks, guys, for listening to this episode. I hope you enjoyed what you heard. I hope you love what you're hearing. If you like this episode, guys, or any of the episodes that you're listening to here at The Hidden Why, please do me a favor by sharing it. You can share it with your families. You can share it with your loved ones. You can do that by using your favorite social media channels, using the icons on the platform that you're listening to The Hidden Why podcast. Also, guys, if you're a fan of the show, please connect with me. Connect with me at thehiddenwhy.com. I love to hear from you. I love to converse with the people that listen to this show to find out what they enjoy, what they don't enjoy, and perhaps if they have any questions or feedback for the show as well. You can stay up to date with all that I'm releasing here, guys. I do a solo show every Monday, a 3-minute thought every Thursday. I do 2 interviews a week on a Wednesday and a Saturday, and a book review every Friday. You can stay up to date with all that by subscribing to my newsletter at thehiddenwhy.com. Just enter your email address there, and also subscribing to the podcast on the platform that you choose to listen to your podcasts. You can also support the show, guys, by using the Amazon links at thehiddenwhy.com. So if you like books, you can get all the books that I review there, and anything else really that you like to purchase through Amazon. So use that link, it helps support the show. And we've also got a deal with Audible, guys. Audible is a fantastic way to listen to all your favorite books. We've got a deal with them so you can get 2 free books when you subscribe subscribe to a 30-day free trial. So check that out again at thehiddenwhy.com. Guys, that's it from me. You know what to do. Go out there, breathe more passion into every single moment. Do everything with greater purpose, and in doing so you will discover your hidden why. This is The Hidden Why. My name is Lee Martinuzzi. Until next time, peace, passion, and purpose. See you soon.